You won't believe what happened when HOA Karen tried to sell my lake behind my back. It all started one calm Thursday morning when I was sipping my coffee and looking out over the water. Something I'd done nearly every morning for the past 15 years. That lake wasn't just a pretty view, it was part of my land, part of my family's legacy. My dad bought this 12-acre ranch long before this neighborhood ever existed, and when he passed it down to me, he made me promise to protect it. It was peaceful, quiet, and mine until Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, decided it was hers to sell. The first sign of trouble came with a phone call from my buddy Hank, who lives a few houses down the street. "Hey man, did you authorize someone to put up a private property sign by your lake?" I nearly dropped my mug. "What are you talking about?" I asked. "There's a guy in a suit out there with Karen, measuring stuff, and she's talking about a new development or something," Hank said. I jumped in my truck and raced down to the lake. Sure enough, there she was, Karen, clipboard in hand, walking around like she owned the place, giving some guy directions as if she were planning a whole resort. I parked, got out, and stormed toward them. "What exactly is going on here?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. Karen turned slowly, wearing that smug grin that everyone in the neighborhood knew too well. "We're making improvements," she said. "This lake will be part of a new private retreat area for the community. We've sold it to a developer, my boyfriend's company. Actually, isn't that exciting?" I blinked, stunned. "You sold what?" "This lake isn't HOA property. It's mine. You know that." She didn't even flinch. "That's where you're mistaken," she said. "We found an old record that shows the lake was deeded to the HOA years ago. We voted on the sale last week. It's done." I couldn't believe the audacity. This woman had forged a record, probably roped in someone to fake documents and somehow convinced the rest of the HOA board to go along with it. "I never deeded this lake to anyone," I said. "You have no authority here." She shrugged. "The vote passed. It's a done deal." That's when I knew she was trying to pull off the biggest scam of her life. What Karen didn't count on was me having every piece of paperwork from the last 3 decades. The original deed, the easement agreement with the HOA that allowed community members access to the lake for fishing and kayaking, and the tax records all in my name. That same evening, I called my attorney. I explained what happened, sent over all the documents, and he nearly laughed at how poorly thought out her plan was. "She doesn't have a legal leg to stand on," he told me. "We'll file a cease in the morning," but Karen wasn't done yet. That night, she posted in the neighborhood Facebook group, "Big news. The HOA is upgrading our community with lakefront improvements. Construction starts soon. Please respect private signs." The comments were full of praise from homeowners who had no idea the whole thing was a lie. That was Karen's game: create chaos, pretend it's under control, and then bully anyone who disagreed. The next morning, I walked down to my dock, just like I always did, fishing pole in hand, hoping for some peace and quiet while my lawyer handled the legal side. But peace didn't last long. 2 sheriff deputies showed up around 7:30 a.m., walking down the gravel path toward the lake. "Morning, sir," one said. "We got a report of trespassing on HOA land." I stared at him, confused. "Trespassing?" I asked. "This is my land. Who made the call?" The other deputy glanced at his notes. "A woman named Karen, head of the HOA." I sighed and set down my pole. "Officers, I appreciate you coming out here, but you're being dragged into a personal vendetta. This lake has been in my family for over 40 years. I have the deed, and the HOA only ever had access through a temporary easement. They asked to see documentation, and I walked them up to my house, pulled out a thick folder, and laid it all out on the dining table. Deed, survey maps, photos dating back to the 80s, and the official easement agreement. They took one look and nodded. "Looks pretty cut and dry to me," one of them said. "Sorry to waste your morning." I told them it wasn't their fault. Karen had a long history of calling the cops on people over petty issues. She once tried to ticket Hank for leaving his trash bin out an extra hour. The deputies left, and I watched them drive back past the clubhouse, where Karen was standing with her phone in hand, probably watching the whole thing unfold. When she saw them leave without arresting me, her face twisted in rage. She stormed back to her golf cart and sped off without saying a word. That moment sealed it for me. This wasn't just about the lake anymore. This was about power. Karen thought she could bully her way into stealing something that didn't belong to her, and when that didn't work, she tried to turn the law against me. But what she didn't know was that I was just getting started. I wasn't just going to stop her. I was going to turn her entire scheme upside down. And by the time I was done, Karen wouldn't just lose the lake, she'd lose everything she thought she controlled. The day after the police left without arresting me, I figured Karen would back down, maybe even try to save face and pretend it was all a misunderstanding. But I underestimated her ego. Karen wasn't just your average HOA busybody, she was obsessed with control. The kind of person who thought an HOA title gave her the power of a mayor, judge, and sheriff rolled into one. And now that her fake lake sale had been exposed, she was doubling down instead of apologizing. By noon, she had emailed every resident in the HOA community with a long, ridiculous announcement claiming that an administrative error had temporarily delayed the transfer of lake ownership to her boyfriend's company. She warned homeowners that unauthorized individuals were attempting to interfere with community improvements, and ended the email with, "Please report any suspicious activity near the lake to HOA security or local authorities immediately." Suspicious activity. I owned the lake. I paid for the land. My name was on every document tied to that property. But she didn't care about facts, she cared about optics. She knew that if she made it look like I was the crazy one, she might still have a shot at winning over the neighborhood. Unfortunately for her, I wasn't someone who gave up or rolled over when things got dirty. That afternoon, my attorney filed the cease and desist order to block the sale of the lake. He also sent a formal demand to the HOA board to produce all documents they believed granted them authority over the lake. Karen didn't respond directly, but two of the other board members did privately. One of them, Alan, called me later that night and confessed that he hadn't even seen the vote take place. She said it was just a formality. He told me, said it was already handled. She didn't let us review anything. I wasn't surprised. Karen had probably manipulated the board like she manipulated everyone else, fast-talking, vague details, and bullying until no one had the energy to resist, but things were about to change. When I went down to the lake the next morning, there was a brand new construction crew there, guys in hard hats unloading equipment, talking about clearing trees near the water line. I walked right up to the guy in charge and asked who hired him. Us, some HOA rep named Karen, said we're building a walking trail and observation deck. I told them politely but firmly that they were trespassing on private land. I handed them a copy of the cease and desist order and explained that the lake was not HOA property and any work they did would be considered illegal. Most of the workers backed off immediately. The crew leader said, "We're out, not getting sued over this." That night, Karen exploded online. She posted angry rants on every HOA forum, accusing me of sabotaging community progress and threatening innocent workers. She even claimed I was dangerous and had a history of confrontations. It was laughable, especially since I had never raised my voice to anyone in this community. I'd lived here longer than most of the current residents, but she wasn't just trying to save face anymore, she was trying to destroy my reputation. Luckily, the truth was on my side. I started sharing my own post photos of the original deed, copies of the easement agreement, videos of Karen walking around the lake with the developer like it was her personal project. The response was immediate. Neighbors began asking questions in the comments. Wait, who actually owns the lake? Why didn't the board see this vote? Is Karen allowed to do this without a community meeting? She didn't respond to any of them. Instead, she went silent for a few days, probably regrouping and figuring out her next move. And when she reappeared, she went nuclear. One morning, I woke up to find orange traffic cones blocking the path to the lake. Attached to them were laminated signs that read "Restricted Area, HOA, Access Only." She even hired two young guys in security uniforms to patrol the area and stop anyone from entering. I watched from my porch in disbelief. Karen had turned the lake into a makeshift military zone. I walked down, calmly removed the signs, and politely told the security guards they were trespassing. "This is my property," I said. "Unless Karen can show you proof of ownership, I suggest you leave." They looked confused but didn't argue. One of them actually apologized and left within the hour. Karen must have been fuming. She arrived later that afternoon, red-faced and angry. "You're going to regret this," she hissed at me. "You're messing with official HOA property." I just smiled. "Then prove it," I said. "Let's go to court. Show the judge your fake documents." She didn't say another word, just turned and walked away. What she didn't know was that I had already filed a civil case to terminate the HOA's easement rights entirely. According to the original agreement, if the HOA ever violated the terms such as trying to take ownership or restricting my access, I had the legal right to revoke all privileges, including their use of any land connected to the lake. And you know what sat directly beside the lake? The HOA clubhouse. That oversized, barely used building where Karen hosted her gossip sessions, board meetings, and fake social events. If the court sided with me they would then I wouldn't just get back my lake. I'd get control of the clubhouse too. My lawyer thought it was poetic justice. "She tried to take your land," he said. "Now you're going to take her throne." I had no intention of actually using the clubhouse, but the message would be loud and clear. You don't mess with someone's property. You don't forge documents. And you definitely don't weaponize the law to steal what doesn't belong to you. As the court date approached, the neighborhood began to buzz with rumors. More and more people reached out to me privately, asking what really happened. I was honest with every single one. I showed them proof. I explained the timeline, and most importantly, I stayed calm. Karen, on the other hand, was unraveling. Her posts got angrier, her tone got more desperate, and it was clear to everyone watching that her fake empire was crumbling fast. The courtroom was quiet, except for the tapping of the judge's pen against the bench. Karen sat 2 rows ahead of me, stiff and expressionless, flanked by her boyfriend, the so-called developer who looked just as nervous as she did. My lawyer stood tall, calm, and confident as he presented our side. He laid out the original deed, the tax records, and the easement agreement that clearly stated the HOA had limited access to the lake, not ownership. More importantly, he highlighted the clause that stated any violation of the agreement would result in the immediate and permanent termination of access, including adjacent structures and amenities connected to the easement. The judge's brow lifted slightly when that part was read. So you're saying, this clubhouse, which shares the same parcel ID and sits within the disputed easement zone, becomes the plaintiff's responsibility if the HOA breached the contract? My lawyer nodded. Yes, Your Honor. And the breach is undeniable. Not only did the HOA president forge a document claiming ownership, but she also attempted to execute a sale, misled residents, called law enforcement on the rightful owner, and hired unauthorized security to block him from his own land. That's a clear violation by every legal measure. The judge turned to Karen's lawyer, who stammered through a defense that lacked substance. They tried to say the forgery was a misunderstanding, that the HOA thought it had rights based on historical use. But when pressed for proof, they had nothing. No legitimate paperwork, no vote minutes, no public notice of a proposed sale, just Karen's word and a fraudulent document. When the judge ruled in my favor, I didn't cheer. I didn't smirk. I just nodded, thanked the court, and left. But, inside, I felt like a quiet storm had finally passed, and now it was time for me to rebuild what Karen tried to take. The ruling was simple. The HOA's easement was revoked permanently. All privileges connected to the lake, including use of the adjacent clubhouse, were immediately terminated. The property reverted solely to me. That meant the lake, the trail, the parking lot, and yes, even the HOA clubhouse were now under my control. I wasted no time. The next morning, I arrived at the clubhouse with a locksmith. I changed every lock on every door. I posted new signs. Private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted. I installed security cameras on the roof, connected motion lights, and filed a new deed update with the county reflecting the court's order. That Friday evening, Karen showed up like clockwork to host her usual community wine night. She pulled into the parking lot with a tray of cupcakes and a clipboard under her arm, only to find the doors locked and a large laminated notice taped to the entrance. I watched from across the lake with a cold soda in hand as she tried every door, banged on the windows, and finally stood in the parking lot calling someone frantically on her phone. Within 30 minutes, several HOA members arrived, confused and frustrated. One of them, a longtime neighbor named Melanie, turned to Karen and said, "What's going on? Why can't we get in?" Karen muttered something about legal confusion and temporary access restrictions, but by then, people were already checking their phones, reading my latest post in the neighborhood group. I had uploaded the court ruling, summarized the judge's findings, and shared the real story without anger, without name-calling, just facts. The comments section lit up. People were furious at, "Karen, you lied to us. You nearly sold off private property. You tried to steal his land and dragged us into your mess." The tone had changed. Karen was no longer the powerful HOA queen. She was the villain in her own story, exposed and rejected by the very community she tried to manipulate. Over the next few days, the fallout only got worse for her. Homeowners began organizing an emergency board meeting. A petition to remove Karen as HOA president started circulating and gathered dozens of signatures in under a day. Even her so-called allies on the board turned their backs. Alan, the board member who'd called me earlier, made a public post, apologizing for his part and called for full transparency moving forward. Meanwhile, I decided to turn the clubhouse into something useful not for the HOA, but for the entire town. I listed it online as a private event space for weddings, parties, and corporate retreats. Within a week, I had multiple bookings. One woman even asked if she could rent the lake area for a family reunion. Absolutely, I told her, but just so you know, it's no longer tied to the HOA. This is private land now. Word spread fast. People outside the neighborhood were using the space more than those within it. The irony was delicious. The very building Karen used to control people was now in my hands, helping fund the upkeep of the lake she tried to steal. She could drive past it, glare at it, even fume silently in her house, but she couldn't stop me. Not anymore. One morning, about 2 weeks later, I found a for sale sign in Karen's front yard. I wasn't surprised. Her reputation was in ruins. She'd lost her position, her influence, and the respect of everyone around her. No one wanted to deal with her anymore, and after everything, I didn't have to lift a finger, and revenge justice had already done the work for me. I walked down to the lake, cast my line, and watched the sun rise over the calm water. The same lake my dad used to fish in. The same land my family built from scratch. I thought about everything Karen tried to do, every lie, every fake document, every threat, and how, in the end, she couldn't take what wasn't hers. She tried to play dirty, but the truth caught up with her. And now, as I sat on my dock, sipping coffee and listening to the breeze rustling through the trees, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: peace, and maybe just a little satisfaction. It didn't take long for the rest of the neighborhood to realize the full extent of what Karen had done. And once the truth spread, the wave of backlash hit her harder than anyone expected. Just a week after the court ruling, nearly every resident who had once politely tolerated her started speaking up openly, loudly, and with a kind of fire that had been building up for years. Karen had ruled this HOA like a mini dictatorship, using fear and manipulation to keep everyone in check. But now the dam had broken, and she was drowning in the consequences of her lies. At first, she tried to act like nothing had changed. She drove around the neighborhood in her golf cart with that stiff-lipped posture, nodding at people like she was still in charge. But people weren't nodding back anymore. They were staring, whispering, avoiding eye contact. The same folks who used to attend her HOA meetings religiously started skipping them, and it didn't take long before those meetings were canceled altogether. With the clubhouse no longer under her control, she had nowhere to host her little power gatherings. It was poetic justice. But for me, things were just beginning to look up. I had transformed the HOA clubhouse into a full-blown event venue, and the response was better than I could have imagined. A couple from a nearby town booked it for their wedding. A local fishing club rented the dock area for a weekend tournament. Even a yoga instructor reached out to see if she could run lakeside classes every Saturday morning. I agreed, of course, not just because it was profitable, but because it sent a clear message. This space was no longer a tool for control. It was now a place for the community, real community, to enjoy and thrive. And not the fake kind Karen pretended to support while she was secretly forging documents and backstabbing neighbors. But despite everything that had happened, Karen wasn't done scheming. One morning, I woke up to find a letter taped to my front door. It was written in Karen's handwriting, with a fancy HOA letterhead at the top, though it had clearly been printed at home. The letter was filled with passive-aggressive language, basically accusing me of stealing HOA assets, operating a business in a residential zone, and creating disruptions in the neighborhood. She ended it by threatening to report me to the county zoning office and demanded that I cease operations immediately. I chuckled as I read it. Then I scanned it, forwarded it to my attorney, and tossed the paper into my fire pit. That same afternoon, my attorney sent her a legal reply stating that the judge had awarded full rights and ownership of the property to me, and that any further harassment would result in a restraining order. That shut her up for a few days. But when that didn't work, Karen tried a new tactic: pity. She posted a long, dramatic message in the HOA Facebook group, painting herself as the victim. She claimed that she'd made a simple mistake, that she had always acted in the best interest of the community, and that she had been slandered and humiliated unfairly. She even accused me of taking advantage of the situation for personal gain. The comments, however, didn't go the way she'd hoped. People were fed up. One neighbor replied, "You tried to sell someone else's lake and got caught. You did this to yourself." Another wrote, "It's not slander when it's the truth, Karen," and the one that got the most likes: "We've all been too quiet. For too long, your reign is over." Karen didn't respond to any of the comments. She just deleted the post after an hour and disappeared again. The next few days were oddly peaceful. For the first time in years, I walked through the neighborhood without feeling the tension in the air. People waved at me more. Some even came up and thanked me for standing up to her. "We always knew she was shady," one guy said, "but nobody ever had the guts to push back." "You did." "I didn't do it for praise. I did it to protect what was mine. But hearing that it helped others, feel free to..." That was a bonus I hadn't expected. Meanwhile, Karen's personal life was falling apart. Her boyfriend, the fake developer, had been served with a subpoena for fraud. Turns out, this wasn't his first shady deal. He had been under investigation in another county for a similar scam. She tried to deny knowing anything about it, but screenshots of emails between them surfaced, showing her clearly involved in the scheme. At this point, even her most loyal allies had distanced themselves. Melanie, who had once been her right hand on the board, made a statement during the next HOA town hall, now held in a local park since the clubhouse was no longer theirs. "We let Karen make decisions without oversight. We trusted her too much. That's on us. But it won't happen again." They held a vote right there in the park and unanimously removed Karen from the board. Not one person defended her. Not one vote in her favor. And just like that, her little empire crumbled into dust. She tried one last Hail Mary move, claiming her removal was invalid, that the vote was illegitimate because it didn't happen in an official HOA building. But the irony was brutal. That building was no longer theirs. It was mine. The building she lost because of her greed, arrogance, and lies. I made a mental note to get a custom welcome mat made for the front door of the clubhouse. One that read, "Karen Free Zone." Just for laughs. About 2 weeks after her removal, I passed by her house and noticed a moving truck in the driveway. Boxers on the porch. Curtains gone. She was leaving. For good. Word spread fast. Some people said she was moving in with relatives. Others claimed she was headed out of state to escape the bad press. I didn't really care where she went as long as it was far away from here. That night, I sat by the lake again, the same place this all started, watching the moonlight dance on the water. It was peaceful, quiet, the kind of peace that only comes when you've defended what matters and come out stronger on the other side. Karen thought she could bully me, steal my property, and rewrite the truth. But she forgot one thing: bullies lose their power when people stand up, and once they fall hard. 2 months after Karen was finally gone, life in the neighborhood changed in ways none of us could have predicted. The air felt lighter. The tension that had quietly strangled our community for years vanished overnight. It was like a toxic cloud had finally been lifted. People walked their dogs without looking over their shoulders. Neighbors began chatting on sidewalks again, smiling, waving, even laughing, a rare sound during Karen's reign. And through it all, I just watched quietly, tending to my lake, managing the clubhouse, and occasionally hosting events that actually brought people together, not divided them. After Karen moved out, her house sat on the market for weeks with no offers. No one wanted to buy the infamous Karen house, not with all the stories that had come out about her shady dealings and how she nearly got the whole HOA into legal trouble. Eventually, a retired couple from out of town bought it, unaware of the full drama, but they were kind, easygoing, and more than willing to listen to the neighbors when they said, "You've inherited quite a tale with this house." Meanwhile, I leaned fully into my new role, not as the HOA's adversary, but as the guy who took back what was his and proved you don't have to be loud to be powerful. I didn't run for HOA leadership when people asked me to. I had no interest in politics or board meetings, but I did offer to host quarterly community nights at the old clubhouse, now my event center, at a discounted rate. People loved the idea. We held a neighborhood BBQ one weekend with music, games for kids, and a fishing tournament at the lake. Dozens of people came. One older gentleman, who had never even spoken to me before, walked up and said, "I didn't realize how much stress that woman caused until she was gone. Thank you for standing up to her." But the biggest change came not from events or social gatherings. It came from trust being restored. Neighbors started cooperating, helping each other out, mending fences literally and figuratively. A lady named June, who had a running dispute with the Thompsons over a tree branch, reached out and apologized. People began repairing what had been broken. And slowly, we became a neighborhood again, not just a collection of houses under surveillance. On my side, I kept things professional but fair. I reinvested some of the revenue from the clubhouse rentals into beautifying the area. I cleaned up the shoreline of the lake, added solar-powered lighting, and even installed a few benches overlooking the water. I didn't do it for the HOA, I did it for the people, the families, the kids who liked to feed ducks in the morning, the teens who came to fish after school. It felt good, better than revenge ever could. One day, I received a letter in the mail from the county office. At first, I braced myself after all that had happened. Part of me still expected another complaint, another false report, but this time, it was different. The county recognized my event center as a certified small business and awarded me a community improvement grant. Apparently, the impact I had made in just a few weeks qualified me for recognition. I was stunned. I never thought that reclaiming my land would lead to something so positive. What started as a battle over property turned into a ripple effect that uplifted everyone around me. The irony still made me smile. Karen tried to steal my lake to boost her own image, and in doing so, she destroyed hers. I stood my ground too, protect what was mine, and in the process, I gained something even bigger: respect. Real, earned respect. People started calling the lake by its old name again, Mason's Lake, just like my dad used to call it. Even people who'd never met my father said it like it was tradition. I'd see new neighbors pointing across the water, telling their kids, "That's Mason's Lake, the best fishing spot around." That meant more to me than any courtroom victory ever could. One afternoon, I spotted a couple of teens near the lake trying to fly a cheap kite. The wind kept dragging it down. I remembered how my dad used to make kites with me out of newspaper and sticks. I walked over, showed them a trick or two, and within minutes, their kite was soaring. They smiled, thanked me, and ran off laughing. Simple moment, but something about it stuck with me. That's what Karen never understood. This place wasn't about control. It wasn't about rules and power and HOA titles. It was about people living side by side, sharing space, looking out for one another. Karen thought she could own that spirit, with a title and a clipboard, but all she really did was try to crush it. And when she failed, we all remembered what community actually looks like. Every now and then, someone would bring her up. "Remember Karen?" Someone would ask during a cookout or a board meeting held at the park. The response was always the same, a mix of groans and laughter. Hard to forget, that woman caused more drama than a soap opera. But after a while, we stopped bringing her up. Not because we forgot, but because we moved on. Karen became a story, a warning, and then just a memory. Her chapter ended, and a new one began without her. I still sit by the lake most mornings, coffee in hand, Boots on the dock, watching the sunrise reflect on the water my father left me. I think about how close I came to losing it, how a single person's greed nearly took away decades of peace. But I also think about how standing up quietly, firmly, and legally restored not just the land, but the spirit of our community. Some battles are loud, others are silent. This one was both. But in the end, the truth won. And as the ripples stretch across Mason's Lake each morning, I'm reminded that sometimes protecting what's yours isn't just about keeping it safe. Sometimes it's about creating something better with it once the storm has passed.